Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and our guest today is Sana Butler. She's the founder of Transformative Tourism, an organization looking to build tourism in Africa that will help to protect World Heritage sites and help lift communities out of poverty. Sana, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you.
Oh, happy to be here.
So, Sana, tell us a little bit. Let's start at a painful place. Tell us what you see as being the problem or problems in Africa that you're hoping to address.
So the main problem within the tourism industry, which is the sector I'm most familiar with, is what the UN calls leakages, which is the amount of money that comes into the host countries for the vacationers spend. That money leaks out. So that means if you spend $100 in Rwanda, $90 of that leaks out to a foreign-owned company because majority of the infrastructure is foreign-owned throughout Africa. Rwanda is just an example. So what happens is the countries and the continent as a whole struggles with the base of the pyramid growing, not because the money doesn't enter the country. The struggle comes from the money not staying.
Yeah.
And what we see is the greatest promise, and we've spoken to a lot of economists about this, is economic retention within the tourism industry. And we're not talking pennies, we're talking about a $40 billion industry in Sub-Saharan Africa alone. So the idea, if you can create economic retention, local infrastructure that is owned by the community or owned by the citizens of the host countries, you can really create transformative economic growth, shared prosperity. You can level the inequality that exists within the tourism industry, and you can tap into a lot of what the UN talks about for the sustainable goals. And I think the tourism is probably has the most opportunity for that to happen because it's a direct transfer of money. Unlike a lot of industries where the money is circulated indirectly into communities, within the tourism industry, you're spending your money directly into the host communities where poverty exists.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. There's another issue related to the UNESCO World Heritage sites that you mentioned in our pre-interview discussion.
Yeah, so the idea is to create local infrastructure for the community to run. And there's a wealth of potential in the tourism industry as it relates to these UNESCO World Heritage sites. And most people think of, say, Machu Picchu as an example of a World Heritage site, or they think of Victoria Falls, which does exist in Zimbabwe and Zambia, as an example of a UNESCO World Heritage site. But there are many, many more that have been left to deteriorate in countries solely because these countries don't have the infrastructure, don't have the investments nor the funds to be able to restore them. So these UNESCO sites have been left to, in some ways, rot away. And yet these sites are sort of the markers of our history of humankind. And what we believe is when restoring these sites, and there's some studies that talk about how these sites can make about $20 to $100 million a year in visitor revenue. When restoring these sites, restore them not only for the cultural conservation of what greets your children when you're dead and gone, what greets your children in terms of history, but also from the eradicating poverty side. Because if you can create an infrastructure that's locally owned that makes $20 to $100 million, you create the network around it, right? The workforce development around it, so that's not just money, it's this collective impact of change, which is what we're focusing on. You can really transform what the UN 2030 goals, which is to eradicate poverty by the year 2030. You can really do that. There really is a possibility of eradicating poverty in countries that exist when you commit to the big picture of change, which is what we're doing with the UNESCO sites.
I see. Now, tell us a little bit. Let's step back. Tell us about your plan. What is it that you are hoping to do now?
Good question. So we have a short-term mission and a long-term mission. So we are a conservation organization that restores UNESCO World Heritage sites for the local community to run. And we use low volume, high value tourism to support those initiatives. So because these UNESCO World Heritage sites have been left to deteriorate for so long, right? We're talking about Sudan, for example, has the highest number of pyramids outside that surpass Egypt. We're talking about Zimbabwe, which has Great Zimbabwe, that's connected to Queen Sheba and the golden city of Queen Sheba that's mentioned in the Old Testament. These sites have been left to deteriorate for so long that to create the funding stream for them requires a long road funding system. So we can't constantly go back to impact investors. We can't constantly go back to nonprofits because you're beholden to decision makers. So we created what is a long road sustainable financial system to create this consistent, infinite revenue stream to support our initiatives. And there's a short-term and a long-term mission. The short-term is to create private jet tours. We have the first ever UNESCO Africa being developed or happening in March 2017. If you go to our website, which is listed, we mentioned that. It's the first ever UNESCO Africa private jet tour. And with that, 30% of the proceeds go into what we call the boldest preservation conservation movement, which is to preserve these sites. So 30% of the money that's spent goes into that. So that's the short term. It's not only to raise awareness, but also to start the initial funding for the project. The long-term goal is to, what we say is we're piggybacking on what already exists, which is a successful model. If you are a traveler and you have been to Africa, you are familiar with CC Africa, which is now called And Beyond. You're familiar with Great Plains Foundation, these very high-end luxury conservation lodges that build luxury lodges to support their wildlife initiatives. We take that same blueprint and we say we are building luxury lodges throughout Africa, not to support wildlife, though that itself has a strong commitment base. But we say we're creating these lodges for people and places. People being the workforce development of the sites, and the places being the UNESCO World Heritage sites. So it's twofold.
Great. Now, doing great stuff. Exciting to see. But you've identified some challenges as well. This isn't going to be easy. What are some of the challenges you see that you're having to overcome?
So there are challenges both from a social enterprise perspective, and there are challenges that we really have to commit to the universe that it'll work out the way it will. The key challenge that I had when I first started out. So I used to be a luxury travel writer and for Newsweek, and spent most of my life traveling the world for high-end 5-star travel and spas. And what I realized is that the tourism industry within the social impact space does not consider tourism really as an impact model. And that's in large part because tourism in Africa is luxury. So we feel challenged to have conversations with people who believe in the big five. So the big five, as you know, in the enterprise space are the energy, the education, the agriculture, the health. And if you're not part of those big five, you're kind of out of the conversations. But tourism is the largest direct transfer of money. So when we have these conversations with people who are interested in listening, has been a lot of, that's very interesting, but I'm not really too sure I want to commit to a luxury project. And also the challenge is, because the next conversation becomes, well, the World Economic Forum, right, Davos, says the true commitment to change comes from connecting the base of the pyramid to the top of the pyramid. And that has been a challenging conversation to have, because majority of the impact space focuses on connecting the base of the pyramid to the base of the pyramid. But we believe that change comes from connecting significant purchasing power to the base of the pyramid. So there's a lot of challenges that I think we've been tested and have overcome them, but you know, again, we're focused on the long road, so there are more that come up. But I think what's great about challenges is that once you are aware of them, then you can spend time in thinking about how to overcome adversity, which I think we've been pretty good at.
Yeah, I was impressed with you, and as we prepared for the interview, that you were self-aware enough to appreciate that your program won't solve all of the world's problems, won't solve all of Africa's problems, but you, and so many people, I'm guilty of this, I always want to solve all of the problems. And you've really identified some specific problems that you think you solve, and you acknowledge the limitations. But what do you see as being kind of the limitations around what you're doing?
Right, so we're talking about a lot of money in the tourism space. I mean, it's a lot for the countries, but maybe it's small for the tourism industry. But for the countries, if we're saying, if our model, right, if we believe that we're on the path to do what we want to do, by 2030, we're going to take Masvingo, which is where the Great Zimbabwe, which is a stone city wall of Queen Sheba in Zimbabwe, exists. We're taking the poor communities or the disadvantaged communities, and we are creating a revenue stream, investment stream, so that they can run the site themselves, and then we walk away, and they're left with $20 to $100 million in revenue. The government can easily come in and say, we want a piece of it. And we are contracting with governments, but that is an example of a core problem that we have to believe that countries, and I think it's true, countries really don't want to see their citizens suffering. But if you bring in a lot of money, and money changes things, and though contract can exist, the governments might not honor them. So that's a significant problem. And for the UNESCO sites, the idea is that the transformative shared economic growth and shared prosperity, that really exists if they have a UNESCO site. Some countries don't. Some countries have, some countries just don't have that. So that's a challenge where we are helping some countries, but not all. And obviously you can't commit to all, but you do, when you're setting out on the path for change and bettering the world, you do try and create a big umbrella. But as you start realizing, you start facing the reality, the umbrella gets smaller and smaller, but with that, your change gets more definitive and detailed and focused.
Yeah. Now, Sana, you are really a role model. You are well known and well regarded in the impact space and in the travel space in Africa. I mean, you're a player, and that's why we're excited to have you on the show. But who do you look up to as a role model?
That's a good question. I thought about this. I actually admire principles more than I admire, I think, people. But the top two that come to mind are people who choose the road less traveled, as well as people who choose a self-sacrificing commitment towards hard change versus easy change. The people that come to mind, Jonathan C. Lewis, and I'm probably preaching to the choir about this because everybody on your space probably knows the founder and president of Opportunity Collaboration, which is a masterful idea, right? The idea of we're putting aside business cards, we're putting aside introductions and speeches and presentations, and it's just going to be a conversation amongst friends where you say, what do you need? How can I help? I mean, it's masterful when it comes to the poverty space because we're all working towards that. So, and he has a website called Cafe Impact, which I follow probably every day just to kind of see that he calls himself an unfinished social entrepreneur. So I admire that because he's taken the road less traveled. But also I admire people that kind of commit to change when money is not a factor. So there's a movie coming out, and so I follow people that are outside of the social enterprise space too. There's a movie coming out called Birth of a Nation, directed by a guy named Nate Parker, and who said, I am going to forego all of my millions of contracts as an actor, and I am going to commit myself to poverty so I can make these movies. I'm going to say no to all my jobs until I commit to this movie called Birth of a Nation. And if you know of it, it is almost impossible to have made. It is about Nat Turner and his a slave revolt in Virginia. So but that commitment to change, void of that revolves around self-sacrifice, is a test that I hope I can pass when on this long road of the journey. A test that when faced with the idea of going one way, I choose another based on a commitment to change the world.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, Sana, let's go there for a minute. You talked about personally wanting to pass that test. It seems to me that you could be doing all kinds of things right now, and you are passing that test. And in fact, you are devoting yourself to something that will really make a difference in the world when you could be a travel writer for Newsweek. Why? Why have you devoted yourself to this?
I believe I've been part of the problem. I, for about 15 years, had a great life traveling the world for luxury, 5-star hotels, 3 months in France, 2 months in Rwanda, going gorilla trekking. It was a good life, but I had my eyes wide shut. I encouraged the community. I encouraged the high-end community to support the disadvantaged communities, believing in trickle down. And it was only when I started consulting for the UNWTO that I realized I wasn't part of the change that I thought I was part of, but I was part of the problem. And I feel committed now to part of the solution.
That's great. I appreciate that clear answer. We'd like to ask all to share what I call an impact hack, some tip that would help us to do more good in the world. What's your impact hack?
So I actually have two, and the first one is to stay committed. As you know, the goal and the mission of changing the world, it's not an easy choice to choose, but I encourage everyone to stay committed, stay focused. And I think that is part of impact, right? If the people who want change stay to that focus. And I actually listen to TED Talks. I love listening to TED Talks, conversations about why do we think the way we think, how to make the world a better place. Those exist on TED Talks. So you can stay committed by listening to TED Talks. I also believe that when you, there are what I call validated strangers and strangers that you can meet every day. So the validated strangers are people that you meet at a conference, that are introduced to you. But if you are committed to good, I think the universe puts people in your path that will help you continue on that path of good. And there are strangers that you can meet every day that if you listen to them and take time to listen to them, you'll never know the impact. And I mentioned this, and I'll tell this one story. My luxury travel life at Newsweek, that again led to my life here, that led me to you. I was part of a conversation with a receptionist at a hotel in the Caribbean, and it led to my first story idea for Newsweek that led to my 15-year career. So I say there are people that you can meet that are introduced to, and there are strangers that come into your life every day that you never know to what level their impact is supposed to have on you, but to be open to the world and to listening. I think that's also an impact you can provide.
Great. Well, Sana, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. Before you go, take a minute and just tell people how they can learn more about transformative tourism and how they can connect with you personally.
So I've been in Africa for most of my life. So and you and I have joked about this. I've been a Luddite up until now. So you won't find me on Twitter but you will tomorrow. I love to have conversations about TED Talks and everything else about the mission. Check me out at Sana at Transformative Tourism. Email me. I personally respond to all emails. My website's listed. If you have questions about goals void of travel, you can email me on my personal, which is sana.butler@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Well, Sana, thank you very much for being with us today, and we wish you every success in your transformative effort to help Africa.
Thank you.
All right, let's do some good.